A black homeless man saves a white child from bullies and is shocked to find out who the boy's father is. The park was Malik's sanctuary. It was where he could sit in relative peace, his back against the rough bark of a tall oak tree, while the world moved on without him. For a moment, Malik could almost forget the weight of his world. Then he heard it, a sharp cry, followed by the cruel laughter of older kids. Malik's eyes snapped toward the playground, where a small boy, maybe 7 or 8, was being surrounded by a group of rough-looking boys. The boy, his face pale with fear, clutched his backpack like it was the only thing keeping him safe. "Please stop," the boy whimpered, his voice barely audible over the bully's taunts. Malik's grip tightened around the worn fabric of his coat. His instinct told him to stay out of it, to avoid trouble. But then he saw the leader of the group, a tall boy with a sneer plastered across his face, shove the smaller boy so hard that he stumbled and fell to the ground. "Think you're better than us because your daddy's rich?" The leader jeered, kicking dirt at the boy's face. The others laughed, egging him on. Malik's heart pounded in his chest. He knew that look in the bully's eyes. It was the same look he'd seen in the mirror when he was a teenager, angry and lost. But this kid, he didn't deserve this. No one did. Without thinking, Malik rose from his spot under the tree and started walking toward the group. His steps were slow but deliberate, each one echoing in his mind like a countdown. "Hey!" Malik called out, his voice firm but calm. The bullies didn't hear him at first, too caught up in their cruel game. "I said hey!" The leader finally looked up, his expression shifting from amusement to irritation. "What do you want, old man?" he sneered, trying to cover his surprise with bravado. "Leave him alone," Malik said, his eyes locking onto the bullies. He didn't raise his voice, but there was an edge to his tone that made the boys pause. "And who's gonna make us?" One of the other boys jeered, though he took a step back, unsure of the man standing before them. Malik didn't answer. He simply stared at them, his gaze steady, as if daring them to test him. For a moment there was silence, and in that silence the leader seemed to realize that this wasn't a fight worth picking. "Come on, let's go," the leader muttered, shoving his hands into his pockets. He turned away, the others following reluctantly. "This kid's not worth it." Malik watched them leave, his muscles tense until they were out of sight. Only then did he turn his attention to the boy on the ground. "You all right, kid?" Malik asked, his voice softening as he knelt beside the boy. The boy looked up at him with wide, tear-filled eyes. He nodded, but his small frame was trembling. Malik offered his hand, and after a moment's hesitation, the boy took it, letting Malik help him to his feet. "Thank you," the boy whispered, clutching his backpack tightly to his chest. "I didn't know what to do." "You don't need to thank me," Malik said, brushing some dirt off the boy's shoulder. "Those kids are just bullies. They're not as tough as they act." The boy nodded again, wiping his eyes with the back of his hand. "I'm Ethan," he said, his voice still shaky. "Malik," he replied, giving the boy a small smile. "You shouldn't be out here alone. Where's your folks?" "My dad's coming to pick me up," Ethan said, glancing nervously around the park, as if expecting the bullies to return at any moment. Malik looked around, noticing for the first time the expensive clothes Ethan was wearing and the high-end backpack slung over his shoulder. This kid was from a different world, one far removed from Malik's reality. But in this moment, that didn't matter. "All right," Malik said, his voice steady and reassuring. "How about I wait with you until he gets here?" Ethan's eyes brightened at the offer, and he nodded eagerly. Malik led him over to the bench he had been sitting on earlier, and they sat down together, the tension in the air slowly dissipating. They didn't talk much after that, but the silence was comfortable. Ethan seemed to relax just knowing someone was there, someone who wouldn't let the bullies hurt him again. Malik sat quietly, keeping an eye on the park's entrance, half expecting trouble to find them again. Minutes passed, and finally, a sleek black car pulled up at the park's edge. Ethan's face lit up, and he jumped to his feet. Malik stood as well, watching as a tall man in a sharp suit stepped out of the car, his eyes immediately locking onto Ethan. "Dad!" Ethan called, running over to him. The man's stern face softened as he caught sight of his son, and he knelt down to hug him. "Are you okay, Ethan? What happened?" Ethan pointed back at Malik, who was now standing a few steps away, his hands shoved into his pockets. "Dad, this is Malik. He helped me when some kids were picking on me." James West, Ethan's father, stood up and looked at Malik, his expression hardening slightly. "Thank you for helping my son," he said, his tone polite but distant. Malik nodded, his eyes meeting James's briefly before dropping to the ground. "Just glad he's all right." James didn't respond immediately. Instead, he placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder and started guiding him toward the car. We need to get going, Ethan. Say goodbye. Ethan looked back at Malik, a small frown on his face. Bye, Malik. Thank you. Take care, kid, Malik replied, forcing a smile. He watched as they got into the car and drove off, leaving him alone once more in the park. As the sound of the car faded into the distance, Malik let out a long breath and turned back to his spot under the tree. He sat down, pulling his coat tighter around him as the autumn wind began to pick up. The world moved on, just as it always did. But today, for a brief moment, Malik had made a difference. He leaned back against the tree, closing his eyes. Tomorrow the struggle would continue, but at least for now, he had something to hold on to, a reminder that, despite everything, he could still do some good in this world. Malik leaned back against the bench, his eyes half closed as he listened to the rustle of leaves overhead. The adrenaline that had surged through him during the confrontation was fading, leaving behind a dull ache in his bones. He hadn't been in a fight, but the tension of the moment, the memories it dredged up, left him weary. He thought the boy would have left with his father without looking back, but instead he felt a presence beside him. Opening his eyes, he found Ethan standing there, clutching his backpack tightly, a hesitant look on his face. Can I sit with you? Ethan asked, his voice small and uncertain. Malik raised an eyebrow, surprised. Shouldn't you be with your dad? Ethan glanced toward the park entrance where the car had driven off. He's coming back. He just had to take a call. Malik nodded slowly. He wasn't used to people sticking around after they'd gotten what they needed from him. But there was something in the boy's eyes, curiosity maybe, or gratitude, that kept Malik from brushing him off. He shifted over on the bench, making room for Ethan. Sure, kid, Malik said, patting the spot beside him. Take a seat. Ethan climbed onto the bench, his legs swinging above the ground. For a moment, they sat in silence, the sounds of the park filling the gap between them. Malik was content to let it be, but he could feel the boy's eyes on him, as if Ethan was trying to figure out something he couldn't quite grasp. Why did you help me? Ethan asked suddenly, breaking the quiet. Malik didn't answer right away. He wasn't used to explaining himself, especially not to a kid. But something about Ethan's earnestness made him consider the question seriously. Because you needed help, Malik said finally, his voice quiet but firm. No one should have to face that alone. Ethan frowned as if trying to understand. But you don't even know me. Malik chuckled softly, the sound more of a breath than anything else. Don't need to. Helping someone doesn't mean you have to know them. Sometimes it's enough to just be there. Ethan seemed to mull over this, his brows furrowed in thought. Do you live here? He asked, looking around the park, as if expecting to find a hidden house among the trees. In a way, Malik replied, avoiding the question directly. I'm around here a lot. Ethan didn't press further, but Malik could see the wheels turning in his young mind. There was a sharpness to the boy's gaze that reminded Malik of himself at that age. Always questioning, always trying to make sense of the world. Do you have kids? Ethan asked, surprising Malik again with his directness. No, I don't, Malik said, shaking his head. Never had a family like that. Ethan tilted his head, curiosity shining in his eyes. Why not? Malik hesitated, caught off guard by the innocent question. How could he explain the choices, the mistakes, the twists of fate that had led him to this point? He didn't want to burden the boy with his life story, a story filled with more downs than ups. Life just didn't turn out that way for me, Malik said simply, hoping that would be enough. Ethan seemed to sense that this was a topic best left alone, and he nodded, his attention shifting back to the park. They sat quietly for a few moments, the comfortable silence returning. After a while, Ethan spoke again, his voice a bit softer. Do you get lonely? Malik blinked, taken aback by the question. Loneliness was something he had grown accustomed to, something he rarely acknowledged even to himself. It was like an old coat he wore daily, frayed at the edges, but familiar. Sometimes, Malik admitted, his voice barely above a whisper. But you get used to it. Ethan didn't say anything right away. Instead, he pulled his backpack onto his lap, fiddling with the zipper. I get lonely too, he said finally, his voice so quiet Malik almost didn't hear it. Malik looked at the boy, surprised. Ethan had a father who clearly cared for him, a life that, from the outside, seemed full of everything a kid could need. But loneliness didn't discriminate. It crept into the hearts of the wealthy and the poor alike. Why do you feel lonely? Malik asked gently, careful not to pry too deeply. Ethan shrugged, his eyes downcast. My dad's always busy. He's a lawyer, so he works a lot. I don't get to see him much. Malik nodded, understanding more than he let on. He knew what it was like to want someone's time and attention, only to find they were always out of reach. It was a different kind of loneliness, but just as painful. He cares about you, though, Malik said, trying to offer some comfort. You can tell just by how he rushed over here when he knew you were in trouble. Ethan smiled faintly at that, though the sadness didn't completely leave his eyes. Yeah, I know, but I wish he wasn't so busy all the time. Malik didn't have a solution for that. He couldn't tell the kid that things would magically get better or that his dad would suddenly have more time. Life didn't work that way, and Malik wasn't one for giving false hope. Instead, he reached over and gave Ethan's shoulder a gentle squeeze. You're a strong kid. Don't forget that. Ethan looked up at Malik, his eyes wide and searching. For a moment, it seemed like he was going to say something, but before he could, the sound of footsteps interrupted them. James West was walking back toward them, his phone in hand, the frown on his face softening when he saw Ethan. He pocketed the phone and approached the bench, giving Malik a polite nod. Thank you for keeping an eye on him, James said, his tone still formal but less distant than before. No problem, Malik replied, standing up from the bench. Just glad he's safe. James placed a hand on Ethan's shoulder, guiding him off the bench. We should get going, Ethan. Ethan didn't move right away. He looked up at Malik, a question in his eyes, but whatever it was, he didn't ask it. Instead, he just nodded, his small hand gripping his father's larger one. Will I see you again? Ethan asked, his voice hopeful. Malik glanced at James, who watched him carefully before turning back to Ethan. Maybe. You take care, all right? Ethan smiled, a small, genuine smile, before he allowed his father to lead him away. Malik watched them go, his heart a little lighter than it had been before. As they walked away, Ethan glanced back over his shoulder and waved. Malik raised a hand in return, a rare smile tugging at his lips. He stayed in the park until the sun dipped below the horizon, the last traces of daylight disappearing. For the first time in a long while, Malik felt that the loneliness he carried wasn't as heavy as it usually was. He had made a connection, however brief, with someone who saw him not as a homeless man, but as a person who had made a difference. And that for now was enough. James West gripped the steering wheel, his mind spinning as he navigated the city streets. Ethan sat quietly in the back seat, unusually subdued, his small face pressed against the window. James stole a glance at his son through the rearview mirror, worry gnawing at him. Ethan had been quiet since they left the park, and James knew something was bothering him. But more than that, James couldn't shake the image of the man, Malik, who had been sitting with Ethan on that bench. The man's clothes were old and worn, his eyes tired and distant. James had seen people like him before, people living on the margins, forgotten by society, struggling just to survive. He had always been careful to keep a distance, to shield Ethan from that world, not because he lacked compassion, but because it was a world filled with dangers he couldn't always predict or control. Yet today, that very world had collided with his own, and it unsettled him in ways he didn't fully understand. Dad? Ethan's voice broke the silence, pulling James from his thoughts. Yeah, buddy, James replied, trying to sound as calm as possible. Why did we have to leave so fast? Ethan's voice was soft, tinged with disappointment. James took a breath, choosing his words carefully. I just didn't want to keep you waiting out there. I know you've had a rough day. Ethan didn't seem satisfied with the answer. He shifted in his seat, his small hands fiddling with the strap of his backpack. But Malik was nice. He helped me when those kids were being mean. I know, James said, his tone gentler now, and I'm really grateful to him for that. Then why did you act like you didn't want me to talk to him? Ethan's question hung in the air, the innocence behind it making James's chest tighten. James hesitated, unsure how to explain his concerns to his son without sounding judgmental or unfair. He knew the world wasn't black and white, but as a father, his instinct was to protect, even if that meant erring on the side of caution. Ethan, sometimes people we don't know might have their own problems, James began carefully. It's not that they're bad, but we have to be careful, especially when we don't know much about them. Ethan was quiet for a moment, processing his father's words. But you didn't even talk to him. How do you know he has problems? James sighed, running a hand through his hair. Ethan was a smart kid. Too smart sometimes. It's not always about what people say, buddy. It's about what you can see. Malik, well, he might be going through some tough times. I just want to make sure you're safe. But he was safe, Ethan insisted, a hint of frustration in his voice. He was the only one who helped me when those boys were being mean. He didn't even ask for anything. He just wanted to help. James frowned, his grip tightening on the wheel. Ethan's words echoed in his mind. It was true. Malik hadn't asked for anything, hadn't shown any sign of ulterior motives. But James couldn't shake the unease that lingered, the protective instinct that flared whenever Ethan was involved. They pulled up to their house, a large modern structure in a quiet, upscale neighborhood. The driveway was lined with neatly trimmed hedges, and the porch lights flickered on as they approached. James parked the car and turned to face Ethan, who was still staring out the window. "Listen, Ethan," James said gently. "I'm not saying Malik is a bad person. He might be a good man who just needs some help. But as your dad, it's my job to make sure you're always safe no matter what." Ethan finally looked at his father, his eyes searching James's face. "You're always working, Dad. You're not here a lot." But today, Malik was there. The words hit James like a punch to the gut. He knew Ethan missed him, knew that his demanding job often kept him away from home longer than he'd like. But hearing it from his son, so plainly and without accusation, made it all the more painful. James took a deep breath, his resolve softening. "I know, buddy, and I'm sorry for that. I'll try to be around more, okay?" Ethan nodded, though the sadness in his eyes lingered. "Can we see Malik again?" James wasn't sure how to respond. On one hand, he wanted to respect Ethan's feelings. Malik had, after all, been there when his son needed help. On the other, James's instincts screamed at him to keep Ethan away from any potential risks. "I'll think about it," James said, not wanting to make a promise he wasn't sure he could keep. "Let's get inside and have some dinner, all right?" Ethan nodded again, his shoulders slumping slightly as he got out of the car. James followed, his thoughts heavy as they entered the house. The warmth and comfort of home usually brought him some measure of peace, but tonight, the unease lingered. Dinner was quiet, the usual chatter replaced by a contemplative silence. Ethan picked at his food, his mind clearly elsewhere. James tried to engage him in conversation, but the boy's answers were short, his thoughts still on Malik in the events of the day. After dinner, Ethan headed up to his room, leaving James alone at the kitchen table. He leaned back in his chair, staring at the empty plate in front of him. His mind was a whirlwind of conflicting emotions: gratitude toward Malik for protecting Ethan, worry about the man's intentions, and guilt over how he had handled the situation. He couldn't ignore the fact that Malik had done something he hadn't been able to do: be there for Ethan when he needed someone. But James's protectiveness, his need to control the situation, had overshadowed his gratitude, and now he was left wondering if he had made the right call. James pushed back from the table and walked into his study, where stacks of case files and legal documents cluttered his desk. His work was his life. He was good at it, respected for it, but it had also cost him time with his son, time he couldn't get back. He sat down at the desk, opening one of the files, but the words blurred before his eyes. All he could see was Ethan's face, his disappointment, his longing for something James couldn't always provide. With a sigh, James closed the file and leaned back in his chair. He knew he couldn't solve everything with work, and he couldn't protect Ethan from every hurt, but he could try to understand, to be there for his son in a way that didn't always come naturally to him, and maybe, just maybe, that meant giving Malik a chance, a real chance, to prove that his intentions were as good as they seemed. James made a mental note to visit the park again, this time with an open mind. Perhaps Malik wasn't just a man in need, but someone who could teach them both something about kindness, about being present in a world that often pulled them in different directions. The thought was unsettling, but it was also strangely comforting. For now, it was enough to know that he could try. The following Saturday dawned with a clear blue sky, the kind of morning that seemed to beg for an outing. James could hear the birds chirping outside as he sat at the kitchen table, staring into his coffee cup, deep in thought. Ethan was upstairs, still getting ready. Today, they were going back to the park. James had wrestled with the decision all week. His initial reluctance to bring Ethan back to the park, to possibly encounter Malik again, had gradually given way to a sense of responsibility. Ethan had been right. Malik had been there for him when it mattered. The least James could do was to give the man a fair chance. He wasn't sure what he would say to Malik if they saw him. The man had saved his son from harm, a debt James felt keenly, but there was also a wariness that he couldn't completely shake. James had built his life on caution, on carefully managing risks, whether in the courtroom or in his personal life. But today he was stepping out of that comfort zone, driven by a mix of gratitude and the need to set an example for his son. "Dad, are we going?" Ethan's voice broke through James's reverie. The boy stood at the foot of the stairs, his face lit up with anticipation. He was already wearing his favorite baseball cap, his small backpack slung over one shoulder. James managed a smile, pushing his doubts to the back of his mind. Yeah, we're going. Let's get going before it gets too hot. The drive to the park was quiet, but it wasn't the tense silence that had filled the car earlier in the week. Ethan was humming softly to himself, his excitement palpable, while James focused on the road, his mind turning over what he might say if they ran into Malik. When they arrived, the park was already bustling with activity. Families were out for walks, kids were running around the playground, and joggers were making their rounds. James scanned the area as they walked in, his eyes instinctively searching for the familiar figure he had seen just days before. "Do you think Malik will be here?" Ethan asked, his voice hopeful. James hesitated, not wanting to get Ethan's hopes up. "Maybe. We'll see." They wandered through the park, passing by the spot where Ethan had been bullied. James felt a pang of guilt as he recalled how quickly he had wanted to leave that day, to distance Ethan from the whole situation. But seeing the park now, full of life and energy, he understood why Ethan had wanted to come back. There was something comforting about the familiarity of the place, even with the memories of what had happened. As they rounded a corner near a cluster of trees, James spotted Malik sitting on a bench, his posture relaxed, but his eyes watchful. He wore the same clothes as before, a well-worn jacket over a faded shirt, but there was a calmness about him that hadn't been there during their first encounter. He seemed lost in thought, his gaze focused on something in the distance, until Ethan's excited shout snapped him out of it. "Malik!" Ethan called, breaking into a run toward the bench. Malik looked up, surprise flickering across his face, followed by a smile that softened his features. He stood up as Ethan approached, crouching down to meet the boy at eye level. "Hey there, kid," Malik said, his voice warm. "Wasn't expecting to see you again so soon." Ethan grinned, his face lighting up. "We came back to see you. Right, Dad?" James, who had been walking a few paces behind, caught up to them. He nodded, feeling slightly awkward, but determined to push through it. "Yeah, we thought we'd come by the park again." Malik straightened up, his expression guarded as he met James's gaze. "I'm glad you did," he said simply. There was a pause, a moment where neither man seemed to know what to say. It was Ethan who broke the silence, pulling at Malik's hand. "Will you play catch with us?" Ethan asked, his eyes wide with hope. Malik glanced at James as if seeking his approval. James nodded slightly, offering a small smile. "Sure, if you want." Malik's smile returned, this time more genuine. "All right, but I warn you, I'm not as fast as I used to be." Ethan laughed, already pulling a small baseball out of his backpack. He handed it to Malik before running a few steps away, his excitement infectious. James watched as Malik and Ethan began to toss the ball back and forth, their laughter mingling with the sounds of the park. He stayed on the sidelines at first, observing the way Malik interacted with his son. There was an ease to it, a natural rapport that James couldn't help but admire. Malik was patient, encouraging, never letting the ball stay on the ground for long. He treated Ethan not just with kindness, but with a respect that James found himself appreciating more with each passing moment. "Why don't you join us?" Malik called out to James after a while, tossing the ball to him with a grin. James caught the ball, surprised by the invitation. He hadn't expected to be included so soon, but the genuine tone in Malik's voice made it clear that the offer was sincere. With a smile, James stepped into the game, throwing the ball back to Ethan, who caught it with a triumphant shout. The three of them played together, the tension that had lingered between James and Malik slowly dissolving as the game went on. There were no deep conversations, no probing questions, just the simple shared joy of a game of catch. As they played, James found himself relaxing in a way he hadn't in a long time. He was used to being in control, to analyzing every situation from every angle. But here, under the warm sun, with his son's laughter filling the air, he let go of that need, if only for a little while. He realized that Malik wasn't just a stranger who had saved his son. He was a man with his own story, his own struggles, and perhaps his own need for connection. After about an hour, they finally called it a day, all of them a little winded but smiling. Ethan was flushed with happiness, his earlier reticence completely gone. James could see how much this moment meant to him, how much he had needed it. "Thanks for playing with us," Ethan said as they walked back toward the park entrance. "Anytime, kid," Malik replied, ruffling Ethan's hair. He turned to James, his tone shifting slightly. "And thank you for giving me a chance." James nodded, meeting Malik's gaze. "I'm the one who should be thanking you." for what you did for Ethan. I wasn't sure at first, but I can see now that you're a good man, Malik. Malik smiled, a faint trace of sadness in his eyes. I've made my share of mistakes, Mr. West, but I'm trying to make up for them. James considered that, feeling a pang of understanding. Everyone had their own battles, their own regrets. Malik's journey had clearly been a difficult one, but it was one he was still walking, still trying to find his way. Maybe we can help each other, James said, the offer coming from a place he hadn't expected. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask. Malik looked surprised, but there was gratitude in his eyes. I appreciate that. More than you know. They exchanged a look, a mutual understanding passing between them. It wasn't the start of a friendship, not yet, but it was the beginning of something, a bridge between two very different lives. As they parted ways, with Ethan giving Malik a final wave, James felt a sense of peace settle over him. The doubts that had plagued him earlier were still there, but they were quieter now, overshadowed by the feeling that he had done the right thing. Malik had protected his son when he couldn't, and now in some small way, James had repaid that kindness. But more than that, he had shown Ethan what it meant to trust, to give people a chance even when it wasn't easy. And for that, James felt a sense of pride that warmed him from the inside out. As they drove home, with Ethan chattering happily in the back seat, James realized that today had been more than just a return to the park. It had been a step forward for all of them. The next weekend came around faster than James expected. He found himself looking forward to it, though he wouldn't have admitted that out loud. The past week had been busy with work, the usual grind of cases and court appearances. But in the quiet moments between, his thoughts often drifted back to that day in the park. More specifically, to Malik. James had always prided himself on his ability to read people. In his line of work, it was a skill that often meant the difference between winning and losing a case. But Malik had thrown him off balance. There was something about the man that didn't fit neatly into the boxes James usually used to categorize people. Malik had saved his son, yes, but there was more to him, layers that James couldn't quite see yet, but wanted to understand. It was this curiosity, mixed with a growing respect, that led James to suggest another trip to the park. Ethan was all too eager, practically bouncing with excitement at the idea. And so, with a sense of purpose that surprised even himself, James packed a small cooler with sandwiches and drinks, a gesture that felt both casual and significant. They arrived at the park just before noon. The day was warm, but a gentle breeze kept the heat at bay. Families were out enjoying the sun, children's laughter echoing through the trees. As they walked towards the familiar bench, James spotted Malik sitting in the same place as before, his posture relaxed, but his gaze thoughtful. Dad, there he is. Ethan's voice broke through James's thoughts, and before he could respond, the boy was already running ahead. Malik looked up, a smile breaking across his face as he saw Ethan approaching. He stood to greet the boy, crouching down to give him a high five. By the time James caught up, the two were already deep in conversation, Ethan excitedly recounting his week at school. Hey, Malik, James said, offering a nod as he approached. James, Malik replied, straightening up. There was a warmth in his voice that hadn't been there before, a familiarity that made the greeting feel more genuine. James gestured to the cooler he was carrying. We brought some lunch, if you'd like to join us. Malik's eyes flickered with surprise, but he quickly nodded. I'd like that. They found a spot under a large oak tree, the shade providing a welcome respite from the sun. James spread out a blanket, and they all settled down, Ethan digging into his sandwich with the enthusiasm only a child could muster. For a while, the three of them ate in companionable silence, the quiet punctuated by the occasional comment from Ethan about school or the park. It wasn't until they had finished eating that James decided to broach the topic that had been on his mind all week. Malik, James began, his tone careful. I've been thinking a lot about what you said last time, about making up for mistakes. Malik's expression shifted, the easy smile fading slightly as a more guarded look took its place. He set down his water bottle, his hands resting in his lap. Yeah? James nodded, choosing his words carefully. I don't want to pry, but I think it might help if you talked about it. Sometimes sharing your story can be a way to move forward. Malik looked away, his gaze fixed on a point in the distance. For a moment, James worried that he had overstepped, pushed too hard. But then Malik sighed, a deep, weary sound, and when he spoke, his voice was low, almost as if he was speaking to himself. It's a long story, James, and not a pretty one. James nodded, his expression encouraging. I've got time. Ethan, sensing the shift in the conversation, looked between the two men. Is it a sad story? Malik smiled faintly, though there was no humor in it. Yeah, kid, it's a sad one. James placed a reassuring hand on Ethan's shoulder, then turned his attention back to Malik. We're listening. Malik was silent for a few moments, gathering his thoughts. When he finally spoke, his voice was steady, but there was an undercurrent of emotion that James hadn't heard before. I wasn't always like this, Malik began, gesturing vaguely to his worn clothes and tired appearance. I had a life, a good one, at least by most standards. Grew up in a decent neighborhood, went to school, got a job. I worked as a mechanic for years, loved it too. There's something honest about working with your hands, fixing things that are broken. James nodded, listening intently as Malik continued. But life doesn't always go the way you plan, Malik said, his tone darkening. I got mixed up with the wrong crowd. Old friends mostly. We started drinking, doing drugs, just to take the edge off. At first, it was just a way to unwind, but before I knew it, I was in deep. Lost my home, everything. He paused, swallowing hard. I tried to get clean, more than once. But it's not easy when you've got no support, no one who believes in you. Eventually, I just gave up. Figured this was how it was going to be for the rest of my life. Ethan was watching Malik with wide eyes, the gravity of the story not lost on him. James felt a tightness in his chest as he listened, the weight of Malik's words heavy in the air. What happened then? James asked quietly. Malik shrugged, though the gesture was far from casual. I drifted, ended up on the streets, just trying to survive. It's funny, in a way. I used to fix things for a living, but I couldn't fix my own life. I was angry for a long time. At myself, at the world. But that kind of anger, it eats away at you. He looked down at his hands, the calluses and scars a testament to the life he had lived. I've been clean for a while now, but it's not easy. Every day's a fight. And some days I wonder if it's even worth it. James felt a surge of empathy for the man sitting across from him. Malik's story was one of loss and struggle, but it was also one of resilience. He had been through hell, and though he was still standing, the journey had taken its toll. You're here, James said, his voice firm, and that counts for something. You saved my son, Malik. That means you're worth something. Malik looked up, his eyes filled with a mix of emotions. Gratitude, disbelief, hope. I don't know if I believe that, he admitted, but hearing it, it helps. Ethan, who had been listening quietly, suddenly spoke up. You're a good person, Malik. You helped me when no one else did. Malik's expression softened, and he reached out to ruffle Ethan's hair. Thanks, kid. That means a lot. There was a moment of silence as they all absorbed the weight of what had been shared. James could see the toll that Malik's past had taken on him, the way it had shaped the man he was today. But he also saw something else, a determination to keep going, to try and make things right, even when it seemed impossible. James cleared his throat, his voice steady. Malik, I want to help. I don't know exactly how yet, but I think we can figure it out together. Malik looked at him, some surprise flickering across his face. You don't have to do that, James. I've made my peace with where I am. I'm not doing it out of pity, James replied firmly. I'm doing it because I believe in second chances. And because you've shown me that you deserve one. Malik was quiet for a long moment, his eyes searching James's face as if trying to find some hidden motive. But all he found was sincerity, and it was that sincerity that finally broke through the walls he had built around himself. All right, Malik said finally, his voice low. I'm not sure where to start, but all right. James smiled, a sense of purpose settling over him. We'll figure it out, one step at a time. As they packed up and prepared to leave the park, James felt a sense of hope that he hadn't expected. Malik's story was far from over, and there were still battles to be fought. But for the first time, James felt like they were on the right path. Ethan walked between them, holding Malik's hand on one side and James's on the other. The sun was beginning to set, casting long shadows across the park, but the warmth in the air remained. As they walked, James couldn't help but feel that, in some small way, they were all beginning to heal. And perhaps, just perhaps, this was the start of something new. A chance for all of them to find the redemption they needed, together. Monday morning arrived with its usual bustle, but James had an added layer of anticipation. He had managed to arrange a meeting for Malik, a job interview at a local auto repair shop. The shop was a reputable one, known for its quality work and community involvement, and James felt it could be a good fit for Malik, given his background in mechanics. As James drove Ethan to school, he glanced at the clock. He still had a bit of time before the interview. Ethan was unusually quiet, his usual chatter replaced by a thoughtful silence. "Excited for school today?" James asked, attempting to break the silence. Ethan shrugged, not meeting his father's "otsu." "Yeah, I guess." James could tell there was more on Ethan's mind. "You okay?" Ethan looked up, his eyes filled with a mixture of hope and concern. "I just hope Malik gets the job. He's really nice, Dad. I want him to be happy." James smiled, feeling a surge of pride at Ethan's empathy. "Me too, buddy. Malik deserves a chance to get his life back on track. We'll do everything we can to help him." Ethan nodded, his face brightening a little. "I know you're trying to help him, Dad. Thanks." They arrived at the school and James gave Ethan a quick hug before watching him head inside. As he drove away, James's thoughts turned to Malik. He hoped the interview would go well, but he knew there were challenges ahead. Malik's past would likely come up, and James wasn't sure how the shop owner would react. At the auto repair shop, James arrived early to make sure everything was set up. The shop was a bustling place, with mechanics working on cars in various stages of repair. The smell of motor oil and gasoline filled the air, mingling with the sounds of tools clanking and engines rumbling. The shop owner, a burly man named Rick, greeted James with a firm handshake. Rick was known for his gruff exterior, but had a reputation for being fair and giving people a chance. "Morning, James," Rick said, wiping his hands on a rag. "You ready for this?" James nodded, feeling a mix of nerves and determination. "Yeah, Malik should be here soon." Rick glanced at the clock. "Got a few minutes. I'll show you around while we wait." James followed Rick through the shop, observing the organized chaos. The place was clean and well-maintained, with various tools and equipment neatly arranged. Rick explained the shop's operations, his pride in his work evident. "So, what's the story with this Malik guy?" Rick asked as they walked. James took a deep breath, choosing his words carefully. "Malik's had a rough time recently, but he's got experience in mechanics. He's trying to turn his life around. I think he's worth giving a chance." Rick nodded slowly, his expression thoughtful. "Everyone's got a past, James. It's what they do with it that counts." Before James could respond, the door to the shop opened and Malik stepped inside. He looked nervous, his clothes clean but still worn, and he carried a small duffel bag slung over one shoulder. As he approached, James could see the mix of determination and anxiety on his face. "Hey, Malik," James greeted him, trying to offer a reassuring smile. Malik returned the smile, though it was hesitant. "Hi, James." Rick stepped forward, extending a hand. "Rick, glad you could make it. Ready for the interview?" Malik shook Rick's hand, nodding. "Yes, sir. Ready as I'll ever be." "Great, let's get started," Rick said, leading Malik to a small office at the back of the shop. James followed, taking a seat on one of the chairs outside the office as Rick closed the door behind them. The interview began with standard questions about Malik's experience and skills. James listened through the thin walls, catching snippets of Malik's answers. Malik spoke about his previous work, his skills in repairing various types of vehicles, and his commitment to getting clean. His voice was steady, though there was an edge of uncertainty that James could hear. After a while, the office door opened and Malik emerged, his face a mask of nervous anticipation. Rick followed him, his expression unreadable. "Thanks for coming in, Malik," Rick said, offering a firm handshake. "We'll be in touch soon." Malik took the handshake with a nod, then turned to James. "How'd it go?" James could see the anxiety in Malik's eyes, the way he was holding himself. "I think it went well," James said, trying to sound positive. Rick seemed interested. Malik managed a small, hopeful smile. "I hope so." They left the shop together, Malik's steps slow and thoughtful. James could sense the weight of the moment, the hope and uncertainty that Malik carried within him. "Do you want to grab a coffee or something?" James offered, wanting to give Malik some encouragement. Malik shook his head, though he looked grateful. "No thanks. I think I just need some time to think." James nodded, understanding. "All right, just know that whatever happens, you've got support. We're in this together." Malik nodded, his eyes meeting James's with a mixture of gratitude and nervousness. "I appreciate that. Thanks, James." As Malik walked away, James watched him go, feeling a pang of empathy. He knew that the outcome of the interview was still uncertain, but he admired Malik's courage and determination. James drove home, the day's events weighing heavily on his mind. He hoped that Malik would get the job, that this would be the break he needed to start over. But beyond that, James hoped that Malik would find a sense of purpose and belonging, something that had been missing for a long time. When he arrived home, Ethan was already back from school, his face bright with excitement. "How did it go? Did Malik get the job?" James sat down beside him, his smile reassuring. "We don't know yet. Rick said he'd be in touch soon." Ethan's face fell slightly, but he tried to stay optimistic. I hope he gets it. He really deserves a chance. James wrapped an arm around Ethan, feeling a sense of pride in his son's unwavering support for Malik. So do I, buddy. So do I. They spent the evening together, the atmosphere in the house warm and comforting. James found himself reflecting on the day's events. As he prepared for bed, James felt a renewed sense of purpose. Helping Malik was more than just a favor. It was a chance to make a difference, to offer support and understanding in a world that often lacked both. And as he closed his eyes, he hoped that Malik would find the opportunity he needed to rebuild his life, and that in some small way, he had played a part in that journey. Wednesday dawned with a light drizzle, the kind that turned the city streets slick and shiny. James had just finished his morning routine and was sipping coffee at the kitchen table when his phone buzzed on the countertop. The screen flashed Rick's name. His heart skipped a beat. He had been waiting for this call. He took a deep breath and answered. James West. Hey, James? Rick's voice came through, steady and no nonsense. Got a moment to talk? Of course, James replied, trying to keep his tone casual despite the flutter of anticipation in his chest. I wanted to let you know we're offering Malik the job, Rick said. He starts on Monday. James felt a wave of relief wash over him. That's great news. Thank you, Rick. No problem, Rick said. Malik's got skills. He needs a shot, and I think he'll work out well here. After ending the call, James leaned back in his chair, a satisfied smile spreading across his face. Malik had done it. He'd gotten the job. James knew it was just the beginning of Malik's journey, but it was a significant step forward. He couldn't wait to share the news with Malik. Quickly, he grabbed his jacket and headed out the door. It was still drizzling outside, but James barely noticed the weather as he made his way to the park. When he arrived, the park was quieter than usual, the rain keeping most people indoors. James scanned the area and spotted Malik sitting on their usual bench, his posture relaxed but his eyes focused on the ground. Malik, James called out as he approached. Malik looked up, his expression unreadable. I've got news. Malik stood up, a faint hint of curiosity in his eyes. Good news, I hope. James nodded, his excitement barely contained. Rick called. You start on Monday. Malik's eyes widened, and for a moment he was silent. Then a broad smile broke across his face, a smile full of relief and joy. Are you serious? Absolutely, James said, his own smile growing. Rick said he was impressed with your skills. This is your chance to get back on your feet. Malik let out a deep breath, the tension in his shoulders easing. Thank you, James. I didn't know what to expect. I was afraid I might have messed it up. You didn't, James assured him. You were honest, and you showed them what you could do. That's what counts. Malik's smile didn't fade. I've been looking for something like this for a long time. It means more than you know. James nodded, feeling a sense of satisfaction. I'm glad. And remember, if you need anything, just let me know. This is a new beginning for you. As they walked together, Malik seemed lighter, more relaxed. The rain had eased to a drizzle, and the park's colors seemed more vivid against the gray sky. James could see how much the job offer meant to Malik, how it was like a beacon of hope in a long, dark tunnel. Have you told anyone else? James asked as they approached the playground where Ethan was playing. Malik shook his head. Not yet. I wanted to wait until I knew for sure. James nodded, understanding. Well, I'm sure Ethan will be thrilled to hear the news. They reached the playground just as Ethan was running towards them, his face bright with curiosity. What's going on? Did Malik get the job? James grinned, ruffling Ethan's hair. He did. Malik starts on Monday. Ethan's face lit up with excitement. That's awesome, Malik. You're going to be great. Malik laughed, the sound rich with genuine happiness. Thanks, kid. I hope so. They spent the rest of the afternoon at the park, the conversation flowing easily. Malik and Ethan played on the swings, laughing and chatting about everything from school to the new job. James watched them with a sense of contentment, seeing how much Malik's presence had already begun to positively impact Ethan's life. As the sun began to set, painting the sky with hues of orange and pink, James felt a profound sense of accomplishment. Malik's new job was more than just a step towards financial stability. It was a chance for a fresh start, a way to rebuild and find a new sense of purpose. When it was time to leave, Malik walked with James and Ethan to their car. He turned to James, his expression serious but hopeful. I can't thank you enough for this, James. It means a lot. James placed a reassuring hand on Malik's shoulder. You earned it. Just keep working hard and believe in yourself. That's all anyone can ask. Malik nodded, his eyes filled with gratitude. I will, and I won't forget this. As they said their goodbyes, James felt a renewed sense of optimism. The road ahead for Malik was still uncertain, but the offer of a job was a significant turning point. It was a chance to prove himself, to find stability, and to make a positive change in his life. Driving home, Ethan chattered excitedly about Malik's new job, his enthusiasm infectious. James listened, feeling a deep sense of satisfaction. He had helped someone in need, and in doing so had made a positive difference in their lives. As the car pulled into the driveway and the evening settled over their neighborhood, James looked at his son, feeling grateful for the bond they shared and the opportunity to help others. The future was always uncertain, but for the first time in a long while, it felt full of promise and hope. The first day of Malik's new job arrived with a mix of excitement and nerves. James could tell Malik had been up early. Malik's enthusiasm was palpable, but so was his anxiety. James had offered to give him a ride to the shop, a gesture of support that Malik had gratefully accepted. James and Malik were in the car, the city passing by in a blur of early morning activity. Malik sat in the passenger seat, his hands gripping the edge of his jacket, his gaze fixed on the passing streets. "You ready for this?" James asked, trying to sound casual. Malik looked over, his eyes betraying a hint of uncertainty. "Yeah, nervous but ready. I haven't done this in a while." James nodded. "It's normal to be nervous, but you've got the skills. Just focus on showing them what you can do." Malik managed a small smile, though it was tinged with apprehension. "Thanks for the ride. I know it's just a small thing, but it means a lot." "No problem," James said. "You've done a lot for us. It's the least I can do." As they pulled into the parking lot of the auto repair shop, James could see the hustle and bustle of the morning shift already in full swing. Mechanics were moving in and out, tools were clinking, and the smell of motor oil and gasoline hung in the air. James parked the car and turned to Malik. "This is it. Just remember, take it one step at a time. You've got this." Malik nodded, taking a deep breath. "All right, I'll see you after work?" "Absolutely," James said, giving him a reassuring pat on the shoulder. "Good luck." Malik stepped out of the car and made his way toward the shop. James watched him go, his heart filled with hope and encouragement. It was a big day for Malik, and James knew it was only the beginning of what would be a challenging but rewarding journey. As James drove home, his thoughts turned to Ethan, who was eagerly waiting for news about Malik's first day. When he arrived, Ethan was already at the door, his face bright with curiosity. "How did it go?" Ethan asked, his eyes wide with anticipation. James knelt down to Ethan's level, giving him a smile. "Malik's first day went well. He was nervous, but he's got the cook, and that's a big step." Ethan's face lit up with excitement. "That's awesome. I'm really happy for him." James ruffled Ethan's hair, feeling a surge of pride in his son's positive attitude. "Me too, buddy. Malik's got a chance to turn things around. And it's thanks to everyone who believed in him." The day passed in a routine of work and chores, but James found himself checking his phone often, hoping for a message or call from Malik. By late afternoon, as he was finishing up some work at home, his phone buzzed with a text message. It was from Malik. "First day went well. Exhausted but feeling good. Thanks for everything." James read the message with a sense of relief and satisfaction. Malik's first day had gone smoothly, and that was a positive sign. When Ethan came home from school, he was bubbling with questions. "How's Malik doing? Did he say anything about his day?" James nodded, showing Ethan the text message. "He said it went well. He's tired, but he's feeling good about it." Ethan grinned. "That's great. I can't wait to see him again." Later that evening, as James and Ethan were having dinner, the doorbell rang. James answered it to find Malik standing on the porch, his expression tired but happy. "Hey, Malik," James greeted him, stepping aside to let him in. "How was your first day?" Malik stepped inside, a grateful smile on his face. "It was good. Busy but good. Everyone was welcoming, and I think I'm going to fit in well here." Ethan came running up to greet Malik, his excitement evident. "Did you fix any cars today?" Malik laughed, the sound genuine and light. "Yes, I did. I worked on a couple of engines and did some routine maintenance. It felt good to be back in the shop." James noticed the difference in Malik's demeanor. The nervousness that had been there before was replaced with a quiet confidence. It was clear that the job was more than just a way to make money. It was a way for Malik to reclaim a part of himself. As they all sat down for dinner, James and Malik chatted about the day, Malik sharing small anecdotes and details about his work. The conversation was easy, and it was clear that Malik was beginning to feel more at ease in his new role. After dinner, James and Malik helped Ethan with his homework, Malik offering some tips and encouragement as Ethan worked through his math problems. The evening passed in a comfortable rhythm, a blend of laughter and conversation that made it clear how much Malik's presence had already begun to positively impact their lives. When Malik finally said his goodbyes and headed home, James felt a deep sense of contentment. Malik's first day had gone well, and the positive change were already evident. It wasn't just about the job, it was about the hope and new beginnings that came with it. As James and Ethan settled down for the night, James couldn't help but reflect on how far Malik had come in such a short time. The road ahead would still have its challenges, but Malik was on a path to rebuilding his life, one step at a time. And as he tucked Ethan into bed, James felt a sense of fulfillment. Helping Malik had been more than just a gesture of kindness. It had been a chance to make a real difference, to support someone in their journey towards a better future. James kissed Ethan goodnight and turned off the light, feeling a renewed sense of hope for the days ahead. The future was always uncertain, but with each new step, it felt a little brighter. The first few weeks of Malik's new job were filled with a whirlwind of activity. Mornings began early, with Malik arriving at the shop before the workday officially started, eager to get a head start. By now he had settled into a routine, but the weight of his past still lingered, making each day a balancing act between the new stability and old insecurities. James noticed Malik's growing confidence, but also observed subtle signs of strain. One evening, as they were wrapping up dinner, Malik seemed distant, his focus drifting. Ethan was recounting a story from school, and Malik was only half listening, his mind clearly elsewhere. "Hey Malik, you okay?" James asked. Noting Malik's distracted demeanor, Malik looked up, his expression momentarily guarded before he forced a smile. "Yeah, just a long day. Nothing to worry about." James wasn't convinced, but he let it slide. He could tell Malik was trying to handle things on his own, perhaps not wanting to burden others with his problems. It wasn't unusual for people in Malik's situation to struggle in silence. The next morning, James was heading to the office when he saw Malik sitting on the steps of his small apartment building. Malik was fiddling with his phone, his brow furrowed in concentration. James hesitated for a moment before approaching him. "Morning, Malik," James greeted, trying to keep his tone light. "Everything all right?" Malik looked up, a flicker of surprise crossing his face. "Oh, hey, James. Yeah, just a bit of a rough start this morning. Got a few issues I'm trying to sort out." James nodded, sensing that Malik's troubles went beyond just a rough start. "Anything I can help with?" Malik hesitated, then shook his head. "No, it's just some financial stuff. I've got a few bills piling up, and it's been a bit overwhelming." James listened, feeling a pang of empathy. He knew that financial strain could add to the pressure of trying to rebuild one's life. "If you need any help or advice, I'm here." Sometimes just talking things out can make a difference. Malik appreciated the offer but was clearly reluctant to accept it. "Thanks, James. I'll manage. I don't want to put you out." James put a reassuring hand on Malik's shoulder. "It's no trouble. We all need a little help sometimes." As James left for work, he couldn't shake the concern he felt for Malik. He knew that the pressure of his new job, combined with financial worries, was a heavy burden. It was clear that Malik was trying hard to keep his life on track, but the struggle was evident. Later that day, James was in his office when he received a call from Malik. The tone of the conversation was professional, but James could sense an underlying tension in Malik's voice. "Hey James, I'm going to need to adjust my schedule a bit. Things have been a bit hectic at work, and I've got some personal stuff to sort out." James could hear the strain in Malik's voice. "Is everything okay?" Malik hesitated before responding. "Yeah, just juggling a lot right now. I'll manage, but I might need to take a bit of time to get things sorted." James wanted to offer more help, but was aware of Malik's pride. "All right, just let me know if you need anything. We're here to support you." After the call, James spent the rest of the day thinking about Malik. He knew that offering support without overstepping boundaries was delicate. Malik was clearly struggling with more than just the challenges of a new job. The weight of past mistakes and current financial pressures was taking its toll. In the evening, James decided to visit Malik's apartment, hoping to offer some practical help. He knocked on the door, and Malik answered, looking surprised but pleased to see him. "Hey, James, what's up?" Malik asked, his voice more relaxed than it had been on the phone. "I just wanted to check in," James said, stepping inside. "How are things really going?" Malik sighed, a hint of relief in his eyes. "It's been tough. I'm trying to keep up with the bills, and work's been demanding. I guess I didn't realize how much it would all pile up." James took a seat at the small dining table, noticing the stack of unopened bills and paperwork. "I know it's not easy. Maybe we can go through some of this together. I might be able to help you find some resources or advice." Malik looked at the papers, his shoulders slumping slightly. "I'd appreciate that. I didn't want to admit it, but it's been overwhelming." As they worked through the paperwork, James offered practical advice and solutions, helping Malik understand his options. They spent the evening discussing budgeting, potential assistance programs, and ways to manage his finances more effectively. By the end of the night, Malik looked visibly relieved, a burden lifted from his shoulders. "Thanks, James. I didn't realize how much I needed this." James nodded, feeling a sense of accomplishment. "No problem. You've been doing a great job, and sometimes everyone needs a little help." As James left Malik's apartment, he felt a renewed sense of purpose. Supporting Malik through these challenges was more than just a kind gesture. It was a way to help him rebuild his life, step by step. The struggle was real, but so was the support from friends and community. Back home, Ethan was already asleep, his dreams filled with the excitement of Malik's new job and their growing friendship. James reflected on how much Malik had already achieved and how important it was to continue offering support during this crucial time. James settled into his own evening routine, feeling a mixture of exhaustion and satisfaction. The path ahead for Malik was still fraught with challenges, but James was committed to being there every step of the way. It was about more than just a job. It was about offering a lifeline and being a part of Malik's journey towards a brighter future. As James turned off the lights and headed to bed, he felt a quiet confidence that, despite the struggles, things were moving in a positive direction. With each small step, Malik was moving closer to overcoming his past and finding a new sense of stability and hope. The days had begun to stretch into a rhythm of early mornings and long hours for Malik. His dedication to the job was evident, but so was the weariness that came with it. Despite the financial strain and the emotional toll of rebuilding his life, Malik had begun to find a new sense of purpose in his work. However, it was clear that he was still grappling with the shadows of his past, which lingered even in moments of progress. One Friday evening, James and Ethan decided to visit Malik's apartment with a small gesture of encouragement. Ethan had been eager to share a drawing he had made at school, and James thought it might be a good way to lift Malik's spirits. They arrived just as Malik was finishing up a late shift, the faint hum of car engines and the distant city sounds filling the air. Malik opened the door, his face lighting up at the sight of James and Ethan. "Hey James, Ethan, what brings you here?" Ethan held up the drawing with a proud smile. "I made this at school. It's a picture of the park where we play. I wanted to give it to you." Malik took the drawing, his eyes softening as he looked at it. "Wow, this is amazing, Ethan. Thanks. It's great to have a reminder of the park." James noticed the slight relaxation in Malik's posture as he admired the drawing. "We thought it might brighten your day," James said, stepping inside. "How's work going?" Malik sighed, the weight of exhaustion evident. "It's been busy but manageable. I'm still adjusting to the pace, but it's getting better." Ethan wandered around the small apartment, taking in the details of Malik's new life. "Do you have any plans for the weekend, Malik?" Malik shook his head. "Not really. I was thinking of catching up on some rest and maybe organizing a few things around here." James nodded, sensing Malik's need for a break. "How about we help you out? We could spend some time organizing and maybe even grab a bite to eat afterward. It's important to take some time for yourself." Malik looked at them, a mix of gratitude and hesitation in his eyes. "I'd appreciate that. It's been a while since I had a chance to just relax." They spent the next few hours cleaning and organizing Malik's apartment. Ethan eagerly helped, sorting through items and placing them in neat piles. Malik, although tired, seemed to enjoy the company and the distraction from his daily worries. As they worked, James struck up a conversation with Malik. "You've made a lot of progress. It's not just about the job. It's about rebuilding your life, and you're doing great." Malik looked around his apartment, taking in the organized space and the warmth of the evening. "It feels good to have a bit of order. It's been tough, but I'm starting to see the light at the end of the tunnel." James could see the change in Malik's demeanor. The burden of his past was still there, but it was beginning to lift. Sometimes it's the small victories that make the biggest difference. "You're making strides, Malik. Just remember that it's okay to lean on others when you need to." Malik nodded, his expression thoughtful. "I've been trying to handle everything on my own, but I realize now that asking for help isn't a weakness. It's part of moving forward." As the evening drew to a close, they decided to go out for dinner. Malik chose a small, cozy diner nearby, a place he'd discovered recently. Over burgers and fries, the conversation flowed easily, and the atmosphere was light and relaxed. Ethan chattered about school and his latest adventures, while Malik and James discussed work, life, and everything in between. Malik seemed more at ease, his laughter more genuine, his demeanor more relaxed. It was clear that the support and companionship were helping him navigate the complexities of his new life. After dinner, they walked back to Malik's apartment, where James and Ethan said their goodbyes. Malik stood in the doorway, a genuine smile on his face. "Thanks for today. It really helped." James placed a reassuring hand on Malik's shoulder. Anytime. We're all in this together. Don't hesitate to reach out if you need anything. Malik nodded, his eyes filled with appreciation. I won't forget that. It means a lot to me. As James and Ethan drove home, Ethan was quiet, absorbed in his thoughts. James glanced over, curious. What's on your mind, buddy? Ethan turned to his dad, a thoughtful expression on his face. I think Malik's really starting to be happy again. He seems different, like he's finding his way. James smiled, touched by his son's insight. Yes, he is. It's a journey, but he's making progress. And your drawing made a big difference too. Ethan beamed, proud of his contribution. I'm glad. I want him to be happy. Back at home, as James and Ethan settled in for the night, James reflected on the day's events. Malik was finding a new perspective, and though the road ahead was still challenging, there was a renewed sense of hope and possibility. James knew that Malik's journey was far from over, but the support of friends and the small steps forward were making a real difference. It wasn't just about finding a job or managing finances. It was about rebuilding confidence, finding joy, and embracing a new beginning. As James tucked Ethan into bed and wished him good night, he felt a deep sense of satisfaction. Helping Malik through these challenges had been a significant endeavor, but it was clear that the effort was paying off. The future was still uncertain, but with each step Malik took, it felt a little brighter. James turned off the light and headed to his own room, feeling a renewed sense of purpose and hope. The journey was ongoing, but the positive changes were a testament to the power of support, friendship, and the resilience of the human spirit. It felt a little brighter. James turned off the light and headed to his own room, feeling a renewed sense of purpose and hope. The journey was ongoing, but the positive changes were a testament to the power of support, friendship, and the resilience of the human spirit.